Hi guys, today going to be making a skull-shaped cave in a wintry setting. So something that could be used in IceWind Dale. And to start with, beveling a foamcore base, and then gluing two bits of styrofoam together to make one large piece. And then going around and cutting off any of the straight edges, beveling the edges, and making it a bit more organic. And we want to get rid of the blockiness, so it doesn't just look like two sheets of styrofoam stuck to each other. So going in at lots of different angles, and cutting different sections out. Then, with two triangles, we're going to make some kind of eye shapes. So cutting them into arches, and defining a kind of nose shape at the front of the skull. And we don't want it to be like a realistic skull, we want it to look like a rock formation that looks a bit like an animal or a monster. So the proportions are not going to be right, and if anything it would look weird if they did. So cutting the arches out of the triangle shapes, we're going to make some eyebrows, and then we're going to glue them on the top of the skull. We're then going to glue some shapes onto the base so we have a kind of structure to build around, and then we're going to cut and mangle them into a more natural shape. I found that two sheets of styrofoam was about the right height to put the skull on top, and that gives room to hide something in the middle of the piece, or put a tea light in. I also played around with angling the skull upwards so it would stick up into the sky, but I couldn't get a way for it to be structurally sound, so I just went with a flat top instead. And I want some stalagmites and tights to be the kind of teeth in the front of the skull. So taking some columns of styrofoam, going to carve them down into roughly fang shapes. And again, these are not trying to look realistic, it's trying to look like a rock formation that people think looks a bit like it. And then gluing these stalactites and mites in the front of the skull and around the base sticking up. And test fitting often to make sure that the teeth don't conflict with each other and you get a nice snug fit. And if you want to be sneaky, you can actually get the top teeth to rest on the lower teeth, so you have a bit more support at the front of the skull. Next, going to take some thin discs of styrofoam and glue them into the front of the mouth, where the front teeth would be. And these are going to be kind of flagstones that have been put leading in to the cavern. So I envision this as some kind of shrine or some kind of entrance to some big monstrous complex. And going in with a tinfoil ball, going to rub some texture all over all the styrofoam. And if you do this on the seams, you can kind of blend them together, but to fully close them, we're going to use some sculptor mold. And mixing about 1:1 part sculptor mold and water. We're going to mix that up until it looks like cottage cheese. And then we're going to smear it all over the base, as well as in any of the cracks between the rocks so we can blend them together. And also form up some dirt that is going to be kind of blobbed around the base. And we'll go in with some texture paste later, but any of the big gaps, it's a lot more efficient to use the sculptor mold to plug it in. And anywhere where the styrofoam is a bit too blocky, just blobbing some sculptor mold around it, and make it look a bit more like a dirt or crumbling stone around. And really just kind of blend the piece together, make it look a lot more organic. And especially on top of the head, where I glued some more styrofoam to stop it looking quite so flat, it'll really help just to get rid of those seams and make it all look like one big rock. Next, we're going to mix up some texture paste. So with a blend of kind of finely ground up cork and kind of coarse flock, we're then going to mix that with a lot of PVA and some black gesso. And this time I added a tiny amount of water just to make it flow a little bit better. And you can see it comes out a lot thinner and more viscous than the normal paste I use. And just go around, and anywhere you put sculptor mold, just cover it up with some texture paste, as well as anywhere on the rock where you want it to look a bit more crumbling, or you want to have a build-up of dirt. And you can also use this to fill any seams that didn't get hit with the sculptor mold. Next, while the texture paste is still wet, we're going to take some small rocks and just gently push them into the base to add a bit more kind of variation and some smaller stones. And once the texture paste is entirely dry, we're going to go in and prime the entire thing with a coat of black gesso. And this is where it really pays to have added the gesso to the texture paste, because you don't get any weird areas where there's a tiny bit of cork showing through a gap, and it makes it a lot easier. Then, once that's dry, we're going to take our mid-brown and hit all over the base where we have any dirt. And it doesn't matter if you go a bit on the stone, but ideally we don't want to fully coat the entire piece, just where we want there to be the dirt deposits built up. Instead, we're going to paint the stone a mid-grey, as well as the small pebbles on the base. And if you want, you can go over a bit of the brown with the grey as well, just to give it a bit more blending, and give the impact of it being shale or gravel rather than dirt. Next, we're going to take our same brown paint, add a bit of white, mix into a nice tan colour, and hit over the entire base. And here's where you kind of have some choices about where you want to go with the build. And I decided I wanted to go for a snowy kind of atmosphere, so I didn't go over the grey stone with the tan. But if you wanted it to be kind of a forest piece or a desert piece, then you probably would. Instead, I'm taking a very light grey paint, almost white, and I'm hitting the grey bits again, just to highlight the stone and make it pop through the dirt. And aiming to hit more on the top side of the model than anywhere else, but also where any light would kind of hit. So on the outside of the teeth on the base and the back of the base, there'd be a bit of highlighting, but for the most part it would just be on the very top of the model. And here it doesn't matter if you hit the dirt a bit, because that's actually going to help blend it together a bit. And here's where I fully commit to the snow theme. So taking some of this woodland scenic snow effect, going to mix that about 1:1 with some PVA. And it's very important you get the perfect swirl here. And instead of using a metal sculpting tool, I'm using a tongue depressor, because I want the application to be a bit more blobby and natural. But when mixing it together, it feels a lot like mixing together some buttercream, if you've ever done that. Just butter and sugar. But I would not advise eating this one. And you may need to add some more PVA if it's not flowing nicely, I think I did. And then just smearing it all over the base. And depending on what snow effect you want to go for, you might just want to have it fully thick all over. But I kind of went for a bit of a wind-swept look, where the snow has been blown into the crevices, and there are some big deposits around. But you can still see a bit of the base coming through. But on this layer, we're just aiming to put down the heavy kind of snow banks. And once we have our heavier deposits, mixing up another batch, but adding some water this time, so it's going to be a thinner mix. And this is going to be our lighter snow, and this is going to be kind of transparent when it dries, so it's going to be like a lighter snowfall. So it's ideal for the kind of inside of the mouth, as well as the top, and that will help blend the heavy deposits into the lighter ones, and make it look like there's been some fresh snowfall on top. But again, entirely up to what kind of effect you want to make with it. And if you want it to look really good, you then go in while it's still wet and sprinkle snow on top, which I didn't do because I was being lazy. But that's how you get like a nice soft top to the snow. But the watered down mix is ideal for doing the insides of stuff, such as maybe a foot or two inside a building, because it just looks like a bit of snow that's been trodden in and not yet melted. And then going to add a small tea light inside. These ones flicker to look like a campfire, which is quite a nice effect. And that will sit nicely in the recess at the back. And then if you want to soften the light a little bit, you can take some kind of transparent material, cotton wool works very well, and stuff it around it. And that makes it look a bit softer. But anyway, there we go. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you next week.